everyone, welcome back to My Rising Rose. Today we've got something slightly different for you. This is a conversation that I recorded with my friend Ohalomo a few months ago, and it's the start of a series that we're putting together, which is an exploration of the underworld, or the descended movement of spiritual awakening, or however you want to phrase it. He's got a lovely phrase which is the awakening from below. And we're going to be talking about that. We'll be sharing about our personal experiences with this less talked about form of spiritual awakening, and hopefully shedding some light on it in a way that will resonate for some of you. Perhaps you're going through this kind of awakening yourself, or maybe it's something that might happen in the future. But I feel, and I believe Ohalomo joins me in this, that this type of awakening isn't really spoken about enough, and that by talking about it more and being more open about it, we can really shed some light on it and prevent some unnecessary suffering from arising from it. I've known Ohalomo for about 3 years now, and we actually met because of our mutual experience in this topic. I had done a podcast for a friend of mine, Paul, at the Non-Duality podcast, and in it I was talking about this awakening from below, and I didn't use the phrase awakening from below. That's the phrase that Ohalomo uses, but I was just trying to explain what was happening, and I think I was talking about a descended awakening and this different movement of consciousness, and I hadn't really seen anybody talking about it. I was just trying to figure out what was happening within me. And it was shortly after that interview went live that Ohalomo reached out to me, and we had a call and we started talking, and it became pretty clear that we were having some very similar experiences. And that was about 3 years ago, and we've been talking regularly since then. And I'm happy to say he's one of my closest spiritual friends, and over those 3 years we've both gone on many strange personal journeys into awakening, and have been able to share that with each other and support each other, and somehow and sometimes inspire each other kind of in what happens next. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. This is the first part of a conversation we recorded a few months ago. I'll be uploading the second part soon, and we've already recorded the next conversation. We're recording another one today, so this is going to be an ongoing series, and I hope that you all really enjoy everything that we have to share here. Yeah, so who is Ohalomo?
Yeah, so Ohalomo is like a vision that came to me at some point during a very intense Kundalini phase of an awakening process. And it came just as a word initially. And there was this, as we get into things, we can talk more about, my process and sort of all of the things that took place. But there was a very clear moment in this ongoing kind of years-long awakening process where I had this really intense Kundalini energy, kind of like rocket ship, sort of blasting me, ready to blast me off into outer space. And there was I felt like there was a choice point where I could choose to either allow the energy to blast me off into outer space, or to stay anchored to the earth, to the world. And this was late in the middle of the night. I was lying in bed, just my body just kind of like convulsing with energy, and I had this feeling that there was a choice. And I asked sort of like, what are, in my mind, I asked like, what are the outcomes of this choice? And the, the vision that came to me was one of allowing the Kundalini to blast me off. And it would be like going out into outer space and the past the stars into like this void, this total blackness. And the word that came up in my mind at that point to call that a name was Jivan Mukta, which is a word that comes from Hinduism or comes from Indian mystical traditions, meaning something like, being totally enlightened while still while still alive in a body. Um, and then the other choice to stay anchored to the earth, the word that came up in my mind to describe that was Oholomo, Oholomo. And I'd never heard that word before. I had heard Jivan Mukta before, but the word was very clear in my head, sounded out very clearly several times. Oholomo, Oholomo. And I didn't know what it meant because I'd never heard that word before. But I chose in that moment Oholomo, not knowing what I was choosing. But the choice felt right. There was something about that choice that felt right. So then I spent like a very long time, actually. I kept looking for months online to try to find what Oholomo means. And I wasn't sure how to spell it. I was really clear on how to pronounce it, but I wasn't sure on how to spell it. So I tried multiple different spellings. I tried swapping out letters, the H, maybe it's a J, maybe it's like a, Spanish language spelling or something. I tried a lot of different configurations and was never able to find that word, or really anything like it, that was remotely related to spirituality or Kundalini or the earth or anything. But I even though I couldn't find anything that it referred to, I kind of adopted it as like the name for what started to develop as a result of that choice that I made to stay anchored to the earth, to have the Kundalini, instead of rise up through my body and blast me out into outer space, to have the Kundalini turn around and go the opposite direction, downwards into the earth.
Yeah.
And so I had this word, Oholomo, to sort of describe that process and what was happening to me as a result of that process. And so, looking back, it sort of became, I guess, people have a spiritual name or something to demarcate when their kind of identity changes from one of their birth name and their kind of ordinary life into, becoming something different. And so it wasn't that at that moment I became something different, but it was sort of a name for what I was now entering into the process of becoming. And the name would be aspirational for the next several years. But then eventually there was an event where it was clear that I had become a Oholomo. And so then, at that point, I took the name as a pen name to write a book about that process, which I call Awakening the Below, meaning lots of things, but meaning this kind of downward motion down into the earth, into the soul. And that's what the perspective from which that book is written, and from which I'm gonna speak with you about. So I'm using the name Oholomo here to name the perspective that I'm coming from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I resonate so much with that. And like, when did that happen? Like, because we've known each other for how long? 3 years? Is it 3 years? It feels, I think that's about right.
I think that's about right. Yeah. And this was, I think this had already, the, that concluding moment where, I realized I had become a Oholomo. That happened after we met. So, but the process began, I mean, the awakening process began earlier, but this Kundalini event that I was just referring to was in January of 2021. So just over 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like, because we met, like, because you heard me talking about that downward movement, and reached out, and then we became friends, like, through that.
Yeah, yeah. I was listening to podcasts and trying to, I always had a part of me that was trying to make sense of what was happening, because what was happening wasn't really fitting into kind of the classical, um, you know, Advaita or Buddhism or uh, yoga or other kinds of systems that talk about these kinds of things, that talk about Kundalini. Um, they all have this upward movement. Kundalini as bringing you up into the third eye, into the crown chakra, and out into pure consciousness or other kind of transcendent states. And I didn't really encounter other people who were talking about this kind of downward movement. And people were talking about embodiment, but I think they mean something a little bit different than
Yeah.
what was happening to me. So yeah, I was listening to podcasts and trying to sort of, I don't know, hear if anybody else was talking about these kinds of things. I was looking around online for the Kundalini literature as well, trying to see what people were talking about. And yeah, and your interview, which podcast was it on? Was it on um, it was on the non-duality podcast with Paul?
That's right.
What's his last name?
Dobson. I
Yeah,
was talking
yeah.
to him today, as it happens.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So it was on that podcast, and you were telling your story, and you were the first person that I had heard that was speaking in a way that I could recognize was um, very, very close to what I had experienced. And so I remember I've filled out your online form. I don't know if you still have it, but you had an online form that was like, if you want to schedule a, session
Mm.
with Jack and to discuss, your spiritual progress and so forth. And I remember filling it out and saying, no, I don't need your help at all, but I just heard your podcast, and I think you and I would have a lot to talk about.
Sure.
And sure enough, yeah, we spoke for hours the first time and became really good friends right away.
Yeah.
So,
I
yeah.
remember, like, and like, because I could see your face shifting, and I was just like, you look like a Tibetan Lama, like, right now. And like, I've had, like, these connections with Tibet, and I feel I probably have my previous lifetime, I think, was probably there. And it's like a place that feels very much like home. Um, and sometimes see people's face shifting, like, through different versions of themselves when I'm connecting, especially during that kind of when I used to do one-on-one sessions. Like,
Mhm.
it happened quite a bit. Um, Normally, it would just be like the light of their soul shining out, but occasionally their face would actually shift to look like a different kind of face. And I remember that happening with yours, and just being like, I think we're supposed to be like friends, talking. Like, I feel like I recognize you, um, and I mean, I'm really glad that that happened. Like, we've supported each other a lot over these years,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
helped each other move through these different levels. And when I was doing that podcast, like, I didn't really understand what had happened to me. Like, I didn't really see anyone else talking about it. I was like, I feel like my awakening is, instead of going up, it's going down. And
Yeah.
like my body is unifying with the earth. Like I understand her to be like a living being. And in fact, like she's become my God. Like she's like the most sacred thing to me. And the only place I found people talking about similar kind of things for me was like in indigenous
Yeah.
spirituality. Like the way they would talk about Mother Earth, I was like, they understand. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
mm,
Yeah. So me too. I mean, in those explorations that I was doing, trying to find context for this experience, I came to the same place. Initially because it was characterized by an energy in the spine. I was looking in Kundalini, looking in, yogic and Asian um, forms of spirituality and so forth. And um, really, for me, it it was clear that that was not talking about the same thing. And it happens that I have a a portion of my ancestry is indigenous from Colombia, and there was something about the imagery that because I had a lot of visions, a lot of very visual um, phenomena taking place as a result of this Kundalini opening, and the visual phenomena um, involved a kind of sort of radiant serpentine goddess, um, and so I was looking at depictions of Kundalini, the goddess in India, or depictions of Naga um, deities, snake deities and dragons and so forth. And in Asia, I was coming up empty-handed. One day, I just plugged into Google, snake goddesses of Colombia or something like that, indigenous Latin American snake goddesses or something like that. And it was right away, the very first, for first 2 minutes that I was looking, I found an image that was very resonant, very closely related to the kind of imagery that I was receiving that came from my ancestral culture.
yeah,
Um, and then I sort of leaned into that and started exploring the stories and some of the mythologies and some of the teachings, from Latin American indigenous cultures and particularly the Chibcha people, which is my ancestry. And I can't say I was, I didn't become a practitioner of Chibcha religion or anything like that. But the whole uh, world of ancestry opened up for me and became a major component of what was going on. There was a lot in there in that process related to, coming to terms with ancestral trauma, coming to terms with this kind of like battle or um, this war that is taking place within my blood between
mm,
my indigenous and European um, ancestry. Um, and just a ton of imagery and entities, lots more goddesses and other entities that came forward out of once I opened that door to the connection with the indigenous practices. And then really throughout that time, my whole practice base shifted as well, from doing more kinds of, quiet sitting meditation type stuff to doing a lot more ecstatic dancing, ecstatic movement, trance states, possession states, um, drumming, just a portfolio of more indigenous practices has kind of opened up. I would say my ancestors taught me how to do those practices.
Right.
They kind of emerged spontaneously throughout that period. Yeah, so just trying to paint a picture for the people that are listening of the sorts of things that you know um, that I'm into, that I have experience with, and that were working for
Mm.
me during that period. I still did a lot of
Yeah.
sitting. I still did sitting meditation, walking meditation, and I always had a qigong practice too, but and yoga as well. But these indigenous practices, more indigenous inspired practices, became much more central during that time period. There were things that I hadn't done in a very long time. I'd done some of those things as a child, as a teenager, but not in decades.
Hmm. I like, to me, that's so beautiful. Like hearing about that, like this whole other dimension of your own awakening opening up, and in a way that was really unexpected to you. Like, and I know
Yeah,
you've mentioned before, like how um, you've got like a connection to Asian religions, and if deities were going to come forward, you would have expected them to have been from those religions.
yeah, totally.
But
Yeah,
actually, what opened up for you was a completely different direction. And I've seen, you showed me like images of the serpent goddess that you mentioned,
yeah,
and just the symbolism of her, like of this kind of union of the above and below,
yeah,
is so potent within her.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I wrote about a lot of this on the website oholomo.com, and this material is collected under the title "Awakening the Below," and I just found out that's going to be a published book later this year. But yeah, in on the website, there's the image that I was just referring to, the one that really,
Mm.
when I discovered it, just really kind of directed me in this direction. Um, and yeah, that was surprising to me because, like you said, I had a very long relationship with Asian practices, Buddhist primarily, but also some Hindu practices and so forth that I'd been doing for decades, and really steeped myself in a lot of that literature and was very knowledgeable about those traditions. Um, but as like I was saying earlier, as a teenager, I was involved in more indigenous practices. Um, so I was always had, I guess, an interest in both sides, and I call these two sides the above and the below. It's not just Asian practices that are the above, but I think Christianity and most forms of um, Western religions are also above oriented, right? They're focused on transcendence, focused on
Yeah.
escaping the human. Um, they're focused on going beyond the material world and the human world and the world of emotions and life and death and animal instincts and dirt and shit and sex, right? Going beyond all of that into some kind of very
Mm.
refined state, whether it's union with God or emptiness or what have you. And these are really, really valuable, extraordinary states with extraordinary um, insights and perspectives. And I have a lot to say and have experienced many of those. I have a lot to say about all of that. But for me, my awakening process really was much more oriented towards the below, um, which is what we're talking about here. This kind of downward, down into the earth, into the physical, into the emotional, into the the pain, into the suffering, not transcending it, but just really
Yes,
deeply, deeply, deeply inhabiting it.
for
Um,
sure.
and that's where you and I think are, some of the symbolism and some of the experiences that we've had are quite similar, and we always love talking about those similarities. But I think what's really right on point between the two of us is the similarity in our overall orientation. So I might have slightly different language than what you use, but we're talking about exactly the same thing when it comes to our orientation.
Yeah, yeah. I remember us saying we were kind of like mirrored images of each other. There were these slight differences, but some real significant similarities. I'm loving this conversation. It's just like giving me chills because it just makes me so happy to talk about it. And I think one of the things is because um, of just how rare it is to meet people who are really deeply in this place or have been through that place. Um, and I think there's probably a lot of reasons for that. But just to like cycle back for a second, like I remember um, at the beginning of Awakening from Below, you compared, you spoke about the Buddha's enlightenment journey,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
about him like transcending everything. You know, he's rising above everything, like similar to what you were just talking about. And then you were saying, well, imagine if it went the other way. Like, imagine if instead of going above it all, he went into it. And there was just like something so tender about the way you were writing it. Like, it was
mm,
obviously inspired by your own direct experience, like
yeah,
um, of going into those places. And I love what you were saying about like the meaning of Oholomo, you know, like to instead of like becoming this like arahant or however what whatever the specific words are to describe that person who's had like an ascended awakening, awakened above it all. I think of people like Eckhart Tolle or someone like that who's kind
yeah,
of risen above it all and is very clear and like very peaceful. And then like what's the total opposite of that? Like, what does it mean to be like for me, it's like you go into the heart of the earth, like the your place of transcendence becomes the earth itself. Like you don't awaken
yeah,
away from it. You go so deeply into it that you almost come out the other side. Um, and it leaves you a different kind of person. It's like you're baptized in a different substance to water. Like you've been
yeah.
baptized in something else. Um, but I just wanted to say I just love the everything about that.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot in there to respond to. So just say quickly about the story of the Buddha. Yeah, so there's the famous story of the Buddha becoming enlightened is that he's under the Bodhi tree and he's assaulted by the demons,
Mm,
um, demon army, um, which many traditions interpret as his own internal demons, right? His own internal insecurities and temptations and sex and lust, greed. These are all sort of like personified as these demons. And so he sits under the tree and he's being assaulted by these demons and he reaches down and touches the earth. And the story includes the Mother Earth goddess who comes up out of the earth. He puts his hand on the earth to call upon her and she
mm,
comes up. And in the story, she comes up in order to authorize the Buddha. He's not the Buddha yet, but to authorize Siddhartha Gautama. And she said something like, I have been the witness of the world, and I have seen you reborn, countless times, um, working, through your karma and working to you know, I'm paraphrasing and embellishing the story, but she basically like authorizes him, gives him legitimacy, and then says, "You are now the witness of the world." And she basically like hands her position to him, and then this is what gives him the strength or the legitimacy to conquer the demons and become Buddha. Um, and so in the book, I imagine, you know, this is a very above oriented kind of awakening, right? The earth goddess comes and like seeds her position to start the Gotama, right? In this story, so he can vanquish the demons, and he's called the, there's words that are used to refer to the Buddha as like the, the vanquisher, the conqueror, all these very sort of like, you know, male, um, brave warrior terms to refer to vanquishing, vanquishing the human condition and transcending it all, right? And so that's it's an amazing story. It's amazingly inspirational myth that has really played a role in inspiring, generations of people for centuries. But I was thinking in the book, I was thinking, well, what if we retold that story from a below perspective instead, right? And what would that look like? And I was just imagining retelling the story. I'm not saying this is a better retelling; it's just a different, kind of awakening. In order to try to get across a flavor of what awakening from below would be like. And I imagined that he reaches down to call upon the earth goddess, and she comes, rather than coming up and authorizing him or legitimizing him, instead, she like pulls him down under the earth and like holds him in her embrace. And then rather than vanquishing the demons, she holds him while he's eaten alive by the demons, right? And succumbs to the human nature, and fully is just like devoured by his humanity. Something like that is is what you and I have experienced.
Yeah.
Being completely blended, melted down into the earth and into humanity and into the materiality and into the suffering, right? Not in any way trying to separate from it or transcend it, but just to totally be eaten alive by it. That's what the below is all about. And I think it leads to, in the book I have a picture, and if you can like imagine it in your mind, there's like a an upward line, a sort of upward arrow that's going up into the above, and then a downward arrow that's going down into the below, along, it's just an image, but like along the lines of what we've just been talking about. There's transcendent, and then there's like descent, um and each one kind of finishes with a ego death of some sort. I think we all know, in the spirituality community, awakening community, most people know about what ego death should look like in the transcendent, in the above. Ego death looks like the complete falling away of the world, including the self, right? It's a complete, you're beyond the self, beyond the world, beyond all pain, beyond all suffering, in this void. And the void can be like, you know, talked about in different ways, like, I am awareness, I am consciousness, pure consciousness, or emptiness. There's nothing at all. Different ways of talking about that, but all of that's like beyond. The below, you're descending down into the earth. You're sinking down into the earth. You're being consumed by the humanity, by the aliveness, by life itself. You're also losing your ego self in this vibrant, living, pulsating, energy of life.
Mm.
And at the bottom, your ego is completely destroyed, not by being transcended, but just by being held and mixed into um, such an explosively vibrant field of life that there's just no separation whatsoever. And so it's a different type of ego death,
Mm.
but I think I think it's equal, but a mirror image of the transcendent, above based ego death. And so you and I have both experienced both of these. Right. We both, I don't know if you've described this in your recordings, but you have told me about sort of being pushed into the void and having this void like experience,
Yeah.
beyond all things. And I've had those kinds of experiences as well. Um, but these experiences in the below, for both of us, for whatever reason, however we're configured, who knows why, you might say past lives, I might say ancestry, it might just be our biology, it might be our histories in this lifetime, who knows? But we both seem to be configured in such a way that this below based awakening has taken up a lot more of the bandwidth, right? Or a lot more of the territory for us.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that it has. Like, it's in some ways it's been confusing. Is like, and I know it has for you at times as well. Um, because it's less spoken about and kind of ground that's less trodden. Although I don't know how you felt about it, but like I felt pretty excited by that because I like being like on the cutting edge of things. So it's like to feel that I'm kind of exploring either new or just unfamiliar territory is like something that I really enjoy, even if it can terrify me at times.
Yeah, Jack, I was scared shitless the whole time. I mean,
Mm.
I was really convinced that I had lost my mind. I really was convinced that this was some kind of mental illness, some kind of psychosis, it it was very, very, very scary for me.
Yeah.
But um,
Uh, Sorry to interrupt, but like, what
no,
part? At what point during our knowing one another did you feel that way? Like, was that during our time of knowing each other?
well, I think I mean for me, by the time we met, the experiences had normalized quite a bit. But
Mm.
initially, not having the context for this kind of thing, I was doing above type practices, right? Like meditation, and uh, was having some of these above type transcendent experiences, right? Of the void and of different kinds of like absorption states or um, so forth. And then really very suddenly, um, in a very dramatic way. I'm kind of prone to these extreme kind of
Yeah, you are.
awakening experiences. It's kind of just
You've
another
got all the big
feature
ones.
of, yeah, which isn't, I hope I often hear people like judging the 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 drama of the experience as being the
Yeah,
important thing. Like the more dramatic
sure.
the experience is, the more cool
Authentic
you
it is.
are, or the more
Yeah,
authentic it is, or the better you
sure.
are, or the more enlightened you are. I don't know what, some stuff like that.
Yeah.
I completely disagree with that, actually, because the more dramatic the experience is, the more likely you are to cling to them and try to reproduce them
Mm.
and get really like fixated on them, or the more likely you are to just be terrified, and
Yeah.
paralyzed by them, right?
Yeah,
So
it can be
so
really
yeah, so
overwhelming.
for me, there was a lot of that. a lot of fixation, a lot of trying to reproduce experiences, and then a lot of fear when things were, very dramatic. Yeah, so um, the above based experiences are always accompanied by bliss and joy and these kinds of, you have a union with, love, divinity, and everything feels great. And the those can for some people be terrifying. For me, they were always just like joyful and wonderful. Um, and I could always square those kinds of experiences with what I read about jhanas or samadhis or different kinds of, mental states or states of consciousness that people know from Buddhist and Hindu tradition. So it was never an issue. But then when suddenly I'm, used to those kinds of experiences, and I'm suddenly, my body is being taken over by a serpent goddess who's, simultaneously both me and the mother and the earth. And she starts, tearing my body apart, like energetically. And um, I was scared.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
I was, there was a lot of fear. And actually there wasn't fear in the moment when it was happening. I was just like, kind of in a different place. I didn't have the wherewithal to be terrified. It just was later. The initial experience for me was
Yeah.
there was like a very intense, like 45, 50 minute period. And then there was kind of like 2 or 3 weeks of like very intense energy,
Right.
surges. And then that kind of settled down. And then I started trying to make sense of what had really happened. And at that point, started thinking like, oh, probably the most likely explanation is that I've had a mental breakdown of some kind of psychotic break. But there was like a 10% of me that said, um, yeah, probably I've lost my mind. But when I look at my actual day-to-day life, because during this time I had a family life and was going to work and so on and so forth. So if I look at my actual daily life, um, the only effects on my daily life were just I had more energy to bring to what I was doing. And I just had like this outpouring of um, love and compassion for people that I was interacting with. So I think that sort of set my mind at ease somewhat, where at least this little 10% of me could say, yeah, but I mean, this isn't dysfunctional. Like there, whatever is happening in my mind, this is um, seems to be quite functional. So let me kind of go with it, but keep an eye on if it becomes dysfunctional. So I had a talk with my wife and asked her to let me know if I started losing it, if I started being, notably erratic or, um, difficult in outwardly, like in the family, um, to have that kind of sort of barometer from somebody that I trusted to tell me if I was going off the rails. And I just figured like, if in my daily life things seem to be going okay, then what's happening internally, I'm going to take that to be a process that can allow it to play out. Um, and so that's what I did, and it helped take a lot of the fear away, and gradually I settled in. But then there would periodically be more dramatic events that would happen over the next couple of years that would again raise fear. But
Hmm.
over time, generally speaking, I became more and more trusting of the process.
I so relate to what
So
you're saying. But I'm like, I remember a while ago, I was supporting this charity which is called like the um, what they call the Spiritual Crisis Network.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
at the same time as I was going through a spiritual crisis, and so I was
Okay.
being supported by them too. Um, and I remember reading up on some literature at the time, and there was a study from King's College London that was looking at spiritually transformative experiences and the when people basically get admitted to hospital, like where there's a hospitalization because it has veered into some kind of psychosis, and just looking at the differences between people and their environments and everything as to, you know, what determines people having a hospitalization. And they found that the
Mm.
main factor was whether the people around them accept their experiences.
Mm.
And I guess, you're talking earlier about ancestry, and like in our ancestry and if we all go back to our indigenous roots, um, we'd likely find a community that had some understanding of these experiences and some
Yeah.
guidance in place and a normality around it. That wouldn't
Yeah.
be strange. Like, and for me, one of the hardest things throughout this whole experience and why I'm finding this conversation so nourishing is because I just feel incredibly seen in hearing your experiences, because it has this normalizing effect. And so you were saying that you were sharing with your wife, um, and like how much could you share with her? Like, could you kind of, because I mean, it's a tricky thing to kind of know sometimes, I think, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
how much can you share?
Yeah. I didn't want to necessarily scare her either. So I didn't get into, and it also felt like deeply personal and
Yeah.
deeply, um, that like there was something that I really needed to work out myself.
Mm,
And so I didn't want to involve anybody. I very reluctantly, maybe like 2 or 3 times, talked to a spiritual teacher of some sort about some aspect of this, just to get some little bit of feedback or some help with a technique or something. But yeah, mostly I just did this on my own. So with her, I just kind of shared, you know, I'm going, it's just something very general and very, very vague. Like I'm going through something, spiritually that might be a little bit weird.
mm,
So didn't share any details at all at the time. Later, I did once things were more um, settled and I could kind of wrap my mind around talking about them.
yeah.
Um,
No, no,
and
and
and I
that's
had I had a diet like a journal that I kept too because I would have these visions and I would write them down and try to draw what was happening and stuff like that. And I also told her, I said, don't open this journal because if you open it, it's gonna look like the mad ravings of a
yeah, yeah,
schizophrenic or
sure.
something. And you're
Uh-huh.
gonna wind up, hospitalizing me. So don't open this journal.
Yeah.
Um, but I think there's a general principle there. So in the book, Awakening the Below, and but now it's a website. It's open, freely available. So in that book, uh, the whole final section of the book is comparing awakening from below with spiritual emergencies, or spiritual crises. And I'm not going to say that all spiritual emergencies are just awakening from below. That's not true. Um, but I do give some examples in the book of cases that I think were, they were thought of at the time by the person going through it as a spiritual crisis or spiritual emergency. But by the end of the book, after you've read about awakening from the below and what it all entails, I kind of make the argument there and show people like now that you know what awakening from below is, or awakening the below, and now that you know what it is, look at this case and tell me what you think, right? And so I do think a lot of cases where people think they have they've had some kind of psychotic break or something as a result of their spiritual practice. I think, I don't know what percentage, but some percentage of those I think are just an awakening of the below type. Um,
Hmm.
that's happening for whatever reason. We may not be able to control whether we're like an above type or a below type, and us below types are the minority, right? Apparently. Uh, and so
Certainly
I,
the mainstream, yeah.
yeah, in the mainstream for sure. Yeah, mainstream spirituality community. So I feel like I felt like, making the book, putting it up on the website, oholomo.com, and then, coming and talking with you and just kind of like spreading the word a little bit. I think for the reason that you said, it is normalizing, and that can be quite helpful for people to just know when they're experiencing something like this, that there's a path, that there's they haven't lost their minds.
Yeah.
Uh, it's a difficult path, but there's there is a there is a road laid out, in front of
Hmm.
you, and there are some, the book has some instructions and guide, suggestions, for how to navigate this territory. And I know that's what you do in your courses as well, is precisely this, navigating the territory.
Yeah, like it comes up so often, and it's so rewarding uh, to sit with people while they're confused or panicking about some of this stuff coming up, and just being able to hold them and
Yeah,
them to find their way through it, like, and just be calmer at the end, and
yeah,
it's amazing. It's a very moving privilege to be in that position. Um,
yeah,
and I think your book is really important for that reason, like it's a lighthouse, I think, for people um,
yeah.
to to see what's
Well,
happening and normalize what's happening.
yeah, and something I haven't said yet, maybe I should have just mentioned it when I was talking about that last portion of the book, that reframes spiritual emergency as awakening the below. Your awakening story is one of those. Mine is one of them. The Kundalini reversal is one of them.
Mm.
And there's stories from both of us throughout the book. Some other friends of mine too.
Mhm.
You know, have their stories in the book as well. Just trying to give a sense of the texture of what the below looks and feels like, and how people navigate it, and there isn't just one size fits all. It's not like my experience is the same as what everybody's will be, or yours are the same as what everybody's will be. But I tried to kind of collect different stories there to, um, paint a fuller picture of the different types of experiences that people have. Um, but yeah, and at the end of the day, I think you and I, are quite complementary in what we offer, because I'm sort of like the wordsmith, like putting the book together, and like, I'm good at talking, and I love talking with you and kind of expressing some of these things in words. But I don't take on individual, um, clients or students or people to, and help them. But that's what you do really well. So I
Mm.
feel like our skills or our offerings are complementary to one another. And you've heard me say this. I sometimes joke about, I'm the guy who maps out the cavernous, the deep caves, right? The cave system, the whole underground cave system, and I like point out where all the stalactites and stalagmites are. And it's a really interesting map or book, to read about the cave. Um,
Mhm.
But you're the guy that takes people by the hand and walks them down into the cave and leads them through, right? The tour guide who's like, takes them step by step. So, you need both a map and a tour guide. That's our, those are
I
our
know.
offerings.
I've always loved that description. I feel like you nailed it really well. Like the complementary differences between us. Um, and I think it's kind of there's a kind of reflection of that in our conversation now, in that you're articulating the territory with your words, and while I'm sat here, like what I'm sensing is kind of the unspoken um, articulation, if you like that our energies are. Um, we know the places that we're talking about. This isn't theoretical for us. Um, Even while you're speaking with words and theory, you're speaking it from a place of direct understanding. And there is something very significant that gets passed along through that direct understanding. And it's hard to explain that in words. I don't know if, or maybe you can map out that territory, but like the kind of the direct transmission of things, like, because sometimes I'll be working with someone and something from beyond me takes over and holds and guides them through the process and just uses me as
Yeah.
a vehicle for that, and then passes its knowledge on to them so that they know it for themselves. And that's really what my work is. Like, I feel like I'm just a kind of vehicle for the transference of knowledge, which is really just a remembrance. Like, we just remember what has always been dormant inside of us. But I don't know if ever any words come to you to articulate that.
Well, I mean, it's probably not what you were asking, but I'll just say process is exactly the same for me, because like this book was, I mean, I, I pieced it together, right? I asked people for stories and I put them together, and I wrote transition sentences that, stitched the thing together. But the portions of the book that I wrote, um, were essentially channeled, in the same way. Um, I just sat down at the keyboard and something flowed through, some kind of, whether you think of it as energy or entity or inspiration, or, however you want to describe it, something sort of palpably took over my body and just poured out onto the page. And I was writing, thousands and thousands of words per day, just, not eating, not stopping to go to the bathroom. It just was like pouring out, pouring out. Um, um, and I think that, you know, that ties into what we were saying earlier about, awakening into the below, involving the gradual attenuation of the ego self. And by that, I don't mean like egotistical. I mean, like, the ego self is like the control function, right? The function in your psyche that is, um that thinks it's in charge of how to coordinate and how to navigate experience, right? And the ego function thinks it's the ego, thinks it's the self, thinks it's the self, thinks that, it's the captain, of the ship, um, that has uh, all of the other parts of the self under its direct authority, right? And so this whole process of awakening into the below is the ego, one way or another, coming to learn that it's not in control of anything. Um, that can be step by step by step, gradually chipping away at different aspects of control that the ego needs to let go of one by one, or it can be a massive kind of like thorough dethroning of the ego function all at once. How people experience it can be different. Um, but this idea of sort of like somehow stepping aside and allowing life or energies to flow through you that you just described, in your realm, and I just described in my realm of writing and so forth. But ultimately, that's what awakening the below is itself, right? Is that ego control function finally just letting go altogether and just allowing all of life to flow through uninhibited, unimpeded, uncontrolled, unmanipulated by any kind of um, control function, any kind of captain driving the ship, any kind of um, filter that's trying to hold things together.
Mm.
Right? Just allowing life to just eviscerate every last shred of the ego. That's what it's all about. So these moments where we experience that, in the writing of a book or in the conversation or in interaction with a client or something like that, these are moments that are particularly notable, but like it's the quality of the awakening on the whole is that same surrender.